Doing this is Jim from the Pain PT. Good to see everybody here today. Happy to bring another success story here today. I've got Adam on the line from the UK. Adam, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Jim. How are you?
Doing okay. We just chatted off air for a moment or two, and I'm really excited for you to come on and share your story. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and have you share your story with everybody.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, and yeah, I really hope that people find this helpful because it's a very long journey that I've been on. Dates back to 2009 was when I first started developing symptoms. It sort of came off the back of I had a really nasty viral infection at the time. I got glandular fever. I think it's called monoculosis in the UK, infectious monoculosis in the US. And that was really quite horrible. But the doctor kept saying to me, look, just rest and you'll be better within about 6 weeks. Um, the thing is, I didn't get better after 6 weeks. If anything, I actually got worse. Interestingly, it began with a lot of significant fatigue. Obviously, a lot of migraines and stuff like classic glandular fever symptoms. However, once it got to past about 6 to 8 weeks, I first started developing chronic pain symptoms. And I'd never experienced that before. So that was quite unusual. I started seeing my GP again, and they said, look, you're just sort of suffering it longer than most people. I think I was 20 or 19 at the time that I got this. I was studying at university, and when you're at university, the expectation is you don't study very much, you go out a lot, you drink a lot, and you socialize a lot. And I found that literally overnight, having been a really sociable guy who's going out 4 or 5 nights a week with my friends, I couldn't even get out of bed. And we were really starting to get quite concerned. And I remember my mum saying about 3 months in, she was like, do you think this could be CFS? And I remember thinking, what is CFS? Would never heard of it before. I'd never heard of it at all. I didn't even know such a thing as chronic conditions existed. I was 19 years old at the time. And I went to see a doctor about 3 months in. They said, we've got to wait another 3 months, but it's kind of looking that way. And I remember saying, okay, great, so we've got a diagnosis. What can we do about it? And the doctor sort of looked down at me and he said, there's not really anything we can do about it. We just have to hope that in time you'll get better. And hearing that as a 19-year-old is pretty much one of the most soul-destroying things you can hear.
Mm.
Your whole life ahead of you, and it's over before it's even got started. So that was super challenging, not only from a physical perspective, but also psychologically, sort of trying to get my head around this. And I had to, because I played soccer at my university, I played for the university at a high level, and I had to stop that as well. That's something I really enjoyed doing. So I was losing a lot of my hobbies, and I was really struggling to complete my degree. I couldn't get out of bed for more than an hour a day. If I did do that, I would crash. I'd have a massive flare of pain symptoms, massive flare of fatigue symptoms, and that kind of thing. So it kind of felt that whenever I took one step forward, it would be like two steps back.
Yeah.
Mm. And it
When
was
and how when was this? So 2009 it started. Like how far into it that you were really couldn't get out of bed for an hour? How long did it take to get to that point?
Wow. It was pretty much I'd been at least 8 months, I think, where I just couldn't do anything. As I said, I couldn't stay out of bed for more than 1 hour a day. It was really it's quite crazy when I look back to it, when I compare to what my health is now. Um, and it was at that point when I sort of started exploring other options that could maybe help me. I was purely of the mind that it was a physical condition at this point, and that only physical remedies or supplements or anything like that could actually get me better. And I stayed in that mindset for quite a long time. I think the reason behind that is in Western medicine, they do tend to look very much as the body and the mind as sort of separate entities. And we're sort of brought up with this narrative that if there's something so I did all sorts of things and this is sort of 2012 onwards. I was doing Reiki. acupuncture, um, sort of hands-on healing, sort of all of those kind of approaches, reflexology.
Yeah.
I also started seeing a nutritionist at that time, and a herbalist. And I must say, I think changing my diet probably did help a little bit. But I think the reason behind that was because I had a very high carb diet at the time, and I'd have these massive crashes.
Right.
And I really needed to stabilize that. So I did do a very sort of sugar-free, gluten-free,
When was
dairy-free.
this? What year was this again that you were doing this?
This was 2012 to about 2015. So
Okay.
3 years of just focusing on a really strict diet. In hindsight, it wasn't going to get me better, but it did help a little bit. It
Sure.
stopped these constant crashes. Um, but we got to 2015. I was still unable to work at this point because I was very debilitated by my symptoms. I got to the point where I was like, this nutrition stuff, it's helped a very little bit, but it's not going to get me well. It's not going to get me back to the health that I'm hoping for. Um, and I really actually got incredibly, I remember going through a period of about a year of severe depression because of my symptoms and because of the outlook moving forward. And I kind of felt like I'd hit a dead end at that point.
Because you're about 6 years in now or so, right?
Yeah.
Into this living with this day after day.
Yeah, yeah, and anyone watching this call who's been through chronic pain or other somatic symptoms for a long period of time, it doesn't just affect you physically, it affects you psychologically as well because you just feel like you've got no hope. And you're like, am I ever going to be able to find someone who I love and can get married? Am I ever going to get a full-time job again? All of these things sort of come into your mind, and it can become a really quite a dark place. Um, and when we got to about 2015, a friend of mine, um, got tested for Lyme disease and they were positive. And one of my symptoms was peripheral neuropathy. And they said, you should test for Lyme. And I was like, well, I did get bitten, when I was younger. So yeah, maybe I'll just test and probably nothing. But anyway, that came back positive. So at that point, again, I had hope. I had hope that this was going to be the be all magic bullet sort of thing. And I actually went to America to see one of the leading Lyme doctors. I set up like a GoFundMe, and friends and family were very generous. So I flew to DC. Luckily, I had family who live over there, so I could stay with them. Um, and I was prescribed like a series of antibiotics and herbals and that kind of thing. And I was like, I'm going to give this 2 years and just see if, this is the magic bullet. I really did believe it at that time.
Mhm.
Um, so I took a lot of antibiotics, which in hindsight, I wish I hadn't have done, and a lot of herbs and that kind of thing. And I did it for 2 years, really consistently. Um, and at the end of the 2 years, I wasn't better. I
Yeah,
was
I've heard this story many times.
I wasn't better. And the irony is that I tested again for the Lyme at the end of the 2 years, and the Lyme was negative, but I still had symptoms.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, just pause for a
Yeah.
minute to know that I see this, positive Lyme, positive virus, positive bacteria, on and on. And even to think, you know what? We have this, right? And it can be asymptomatic. It's sort of like Sarno said, normal abnormalities in a way, right? So you had cleared the Lyme, but the symptoms were still there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I sort of remember reading a couple of stories around the sort of time when I got to the end of the 2 years that Lyme as an infection has been around for over 5,000 years. They recently, well, about 20 years ago, they found a fossilized human who had been frozen under ice in the Italian Alps, and they tested him for everything. He'd lived like 5,000 years ago, and they found he was positive for Lyme. Yet he displayed clearly no symptoms of Lyme because they'd found him where they found him. He was like a mountain climber. Now, if you've got symptoms of Lyme, you can't really be a mountain climber. It takes a lot of physical exertion
Yes.
to climb mountains and that kind of thing. So I remember thinking, well, he was positive for Lyme, but he clearly wasn't that inflicted by symptoms because he wouldn't be able to do what he was doing.
Yeah.
Um, And I know a lot of people as well who tested positive for Lyme, yet didn't have symptoms.
Yeah.
So I was sort of, I was at this point where I was like, well, maybe it's not the Lyme that's causing my symptoms. So we're at sort of 2017 at this point. As I said, I've been through all of the main protocols which they recommend for like chronic Lyme and that kind of thing.
And by the way,
Um,
just pause for a minute. Just let the audience know what were the symptoms you're having? You mentioned fatigue, but you mentioned the peripheral neuropathy. Tell the audience what the symptoms you had.
Sure. So the worst was the sort of chronic pain, migratory chronic pain, migratory peripheral neuropathy in my fingers and in my toes. These are very consistent with Lyme symptoms, but what I've learned now is actually they're very consistent with sort of brain-generated symptoms as well. The brain can generate any symptom in the body. The fatigue was quite bad. Brain fog was another one. So you can kind of already see that there's a lot of overlap between the symptoms of Lyme, symptoms of CFS, and what the brain can create in terms of
Yeah.
symptomology, the symptom
Yeah.
picture. So
Amazing.
those, sorry, go on.
No, so that's amazing. Yeah, you can have a wide presentation. Like, as you know now, audience listening, brain can generate anything because we're wired up all over the body. So you can have any symptom could be generated by the brain.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it took me a long time to actually accept that as well. When we got to 2017. I treated the Lyme for 2 years. I was negative for Lyme, still had this whole sort of umbrella of symptoms that I was suffering with. And then I came across two books that kind of like changed my life. Now I look back at it. So the first one was Georgie's book, Georgie Oldfield, who runs Serpa in the UK. Chronic Pain, Your Key to Recovery, which I'd recommend anyone read. It's really well written and it's so easy to understand the concepts and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I
shout
read
out to Georgie. I love Georgie, and she's
Yeah,
that is a great book.
yeah, I mean, I know Georgie personally as well, and she's fantastic. And the work that she's doing in the UK, and the conferences that she holds and stuff are absolutely fantastic. Really flying the flag for, chronic pain, recovery in the UK. And I read the book in a day. I couldn't put it down. I literally just went through it in a day, and I just started. After that, I started journaling. I started trying to make the connection between emotions and physical symptoms. The interesting bit at this point was I was incredibly good without realizing at suppressing my emotions. Incredibly good at it. I was an expert at suppressing my emotions. And how do I know that? Because I didn't know what emotions felt like.
Hmm.
I started trying to do this. And I remember I was sitting in my room one day and I had like really bad peripheral neuropathy. And I was like, I'm going to give this a go. Like, what am I feeling right now? Like, what's going on? And I was like, I actually don't know because I don't know how to recognize anxiety. I don't know how to recognize fear. I don't know how to recognize anger as a feeling. Um, so this is when the journey of recovery really, truly started for me.
Yeah, and you probably had, we didn't test you at the time, but you sound like the classic case of what we call lexithymia, which is if people listen to understand that word, it's when you have difficulty with emotions, identifying them, knowing what you're feeling. It's a very real condition, and people who have that are much, much more prone to having physical symptoms in their body that are representing the emotions, but they don't feel them as emotions. They don't even think they're emotions. They think, oh, I got neuropathy or I got fatigue or something else.
Yeah, absolutely. That's me to a T at that
Yeah.
point. And if I had something like a peripheral neuropathy or a brain fog, I was just like, oh well, I'm having a bad symptom day, or I
Mm.
didn't realize that there was actually something beneath that was actually generating those symptoms at that time. So yeah, that's where the journey started. As I said, I started journaling, which in hindsight, I actually don't think I found the journaling personally that helpful for me. I know it's a game changer for some people, but it was the other work which I'll sort of get to later in the call. But I read that, and then I read Alan Gordon's The Way Out book, and I also read the Sarno book, the Mind Body Prescription, I think it's called. Um, and things were really starting to come into place. at that point. A lot of
But
this was,
started to believe this, right? Read Georgie's book, read some of these other books. You started to say that that's me, or you could see
yeah,
yourself there.
absolutely, absolutely. And I was able to start making the connections between feelings, thoughts, symptoms, beliefs. Beliefs is a real big one as well, like the beliefs we have about our health and our symptoms and all of this kind of stuff. So it started all coming together, and I was like, I started working on this myself. And after a couple of months, I was like, I'm really going to need some, professional support in to help guide me on this journey because I don't think I have there's definitely some blind spots I'm probably not noticing in my rear view mirror that maybe some sort of professional insight could help me with. So I went onto SERPA's website, and obviously all of the SERPA practitioners, including yourself, are listed there. And I'd seen a couple of your YouTube videos at the time, and I just felt that you came across really well in explaining actually sort of quite complex sort of things. And I was like, this is really easy to understand. So I reached out and I joined your group coaching calls. And I
Yeah, when
think
was
that
that again? Do you remember when that was? I can't remember
that
when you.
was March 2023. So 2 years ago this month, literally 2 years ago this
Oh,
month. Um, and it took about 3 months, within your group coaching for me to actually notice, I suppose, sustained improvements. So I think it's really important for people watching who are struggling a little bit. Even when you're getting really, really good support, it still takes time and it
and it
still
could
takes.
take longer than that for some people. So the time, we always say throw the time out the window, right? Throw the timeline in the garbage can, rubbish bin, because we don't know how long it's going to take.
Exactly, exactly. And as you were saying, I think, if anyone's saying, I want to get one in a year or even 18 months, or I'd encourage anyone to just drop that. I know it's hard and you want an end point, but I don't think it helps recovery to put that pressure on yourself to be well by a certain time.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
it just causes more stress, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes, for sure it does. And that's why we say we just got to drop it because we don't know. It's not like an injury where you can say, yep, 6 to 8 weeks. You could be better in a week. You really could be. Some people are, or you can be better in 3 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it took, as I said, it did take about 3 months just to start noticing some sort of, actual improvements that I could measure. And for me, that was actually being able to walk more without having, pardon me, without having pain, or to
Yeah.
walk more without having neuropathy, or to go out with my friends for an evening without having the most horrific payback that would leave me in bed for a week. It might leave
Mhm.
me in bed 5 days rather than 7 days, if you see what I
Yeah.
mean.
So you
So
started to maybe share with the audience so during those 3 months, what was most helpful to you personally to get you going that direction?
I think so. You used to send us. I don't know if you still do this, but the audios each day
Yeah,
you'd send us an
still
audio
do.
group. Yeah, and they're fantastic because it helps keep you, as in me, on track. And I'd listen to them every day, and it's quite empowering because you learn so much about emotions, beliefs. Somatic tracking I found was really helpful. So you'd sometimes send us a somatic tracking exercise, and I'd sort of wake up and I'd listen to that for 10 minutes. So I certainly found the somatic tracking, but also I remember in your audios, you'd be like, okay, so what are you feeling, right now? What does it feel like in your body? And it's like those kind of things, just fairly regularly checking in, you actually get a much better grasp of what emotions feel like. And I don't think I would have got that had the daily audios, had we not have got the daily audios. And I remember when I first joined, you'd do them 5 times a week. And then he moved up to 7 times a week. And I was like, yes, 2 extra days.
I still do
So
them 7 times a week, even including holidays. It's like one of the
yeah,
things that just keep going with it.
I think it's great because it helps give people that daily reminder. And I do really think that you do as a patient, you need to put the work in and you
Yeah.
need to do it on a daily basis if you want to get better. There's no easy route through this unless you're one of the super, super lucky ones who reads a book and gets better. But that's really rare from what I've heard.
Yeah.
Um, so the daily audios were massive. And as I said, just sort of the somatic tracking, the learning to tune in with my emotions multiple times a day and develop that relationship with my emotions.
Yeah. And to see, could you see the connection at some point between your emotional state and the symptom state? Meaning you could see, and that's really, really helpful, right? When people can see that, maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So, my biggest emotion that I've been suppressing was always fear and anxiety, which I suppose are actually quite similar in many ways. Um, and once it felt not scary to feel those feelings, and again, that took time. It took time actually getting over that barrier.
Yeah.
Um, but learning to actually feel those and noticing that my body isn't going to shut down if I feel fear. My body's not going to shut down if I feel anxiety. It might feel a little bit tingly and uncomfortable for a minute or two, whilst all of the adrenaline is sort of draining through the body. But like once you pass that, I noticed that even those sort of symptoms, those die-off symptoms started disappearing, but it came with
Hmm.
consistency, doing it multiple times a day. And you really got to immerse yourself in it. I learned you've really got to immerse yourself in it and give it the time that it needs.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. That's important. And I always tell people move towards your emotions instead of away from them, which is what we've been doing for so long unconsciously. So it is a conscious process, right, to connect with these emotions more, to want to connect with them, right?
1,000,000%. And one other thing I'd like to add before the sort of we started noticing some progress was just labeling the emotion that you feel in your mind, just labeling that was really powerful.
Yeah.
And it's not hard to do. I even did it first thing this morning when I got out of the shower because it was freezing outside and I felt anxious because it's freezing. I was just like, well, I'm feeling quite anxious right now. And literally, just the weight just drops from your shoulder.
Yeah, that's right. And then, that's called affect labeling for people listening. It's one of the strategies I teach. And there's a famous saying around that. It says, name it to tame it. That's a famous quote. And it's like, name the emotion to tame the emotion. So as you start just to acknowledge it, it can take a weight off, like you said. It can start to release that emotion versus like ignoring it, dismissing it, right? Minimizing it, suppressing it, repressing. All those things don't do anything to the emotion, except it's stay
Absolutely.
there longer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that would be even like in my experience that just the labeling of the emotions was a great starting point as
Yeah.
well. It felt way less scary than the actual genuinely feeling the emotions or even the somatic tracking when symptoms are bad.
Yeah.
Just the labeling as a starting point regularly was really, really quite powerful.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
I would like to say as well, Jim, at this point, even 6 months in, I still wasn't fully convinced about it fully being from the brain. And I think that's important because it's natural to feel that way until you've got really secure evidence, undeniable evidence that it is coming from your brain. And, for the first 6 months, I was still unsure. I was still on the fence regarding it.
That's your, like we talk about your doubt or your belief, right? Back to
Mhm.
beliefs now, because the belief, like you said earlier, is really powerful. Maybe speak a bit more about that, how that came into being. You had a stronger belief in this, what it was.
Yeah, I think it was, as I said, I did start noticing some, minor but fairly sustainable improvements. But there was still that sort of nagging thought in the back of my head that it's not going fast enough, which must mean that the brain isn't completely implicated in in this symptomology. There must be something else going on there. Yes, I can see that the brain has some influence, but I don't believe it has full influence yet. At this point, I was like, yet I haven't seen enough. I
Mm.
think it took genuinely actually 6 months to a year before I was convinced because there were so many more things that I could do. So as I said, I was walking for over an hour a day at that point, and I was like, okay, well, yes, I'm really starting to believe that the brain is fully implicated at this point, but I need more evidence. And I think when I truly believed it was when I was actually able to go on a 12K hike, 12-kilometer hike with my friends through a very hilly terrain. So, where I live in the UK, I live in the southeast of England. We're very lucky. We've got a massive national park near where we live, very hilly, good for hikers. This is the first hike I'd done since like 2008. So, it was kind
Wow.
of a big deal.
Very
And I was
cool.
yeah, and I was like, if I can do this and not have payback, I know that my brain is fully implicated in creating my symptoms.
And how
So I
much up to that, leading up to that hike, how much distance had you gone to prepare for it? Were you,
You know what? I hadn't even prepared.
yeah, okay, this is important. I want people to take this in that you weren't even like gradually building up to it, right? Yeah, you weren't even prepared, but what was your mindset like in anticipation of it?
So my mindset was really quite calm, because I knew that if I was going to get really stressed and if I was going to be constantly worrying about my symptoms, it will make it more likely that I might have increased symptomology in the days after. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to focus on enjoying this time with my friends and being present, being
Yes.
completely present, because it's very difficult to be super, super stressed when you're 100% present in your environment and enjoying yourself. So
Fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, so we did that. It took about 3 hours. I said it was hilly terrain as well, and it was very icy, so it's quite slippery, because the UK is cold in winter, believe it or not. So we did
And wet
that.
too. Cold and
Yeah,
wet.
yeah, pretty much every day right now it is raining.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did that. We went to a pub because that's what we love to do in the UK. We'll go do a walk, we'll go to the pub, we'll have a drink and have a nice big lunch. And I woke up the next morning and I felt fine. And it was only 3 days later that I realized I thought I haven't had any die off. I feel 100% normal. And the walks that I've been doing before then, as I said, it was like maximum an hour, just go for a walk to town or something. That's probably like 2 kilometers. So going from 2 kilometers to 12 kilometers is a big jump.
We call that flooding therapy. You maybe have heard me mention in the group,
Yeah.
but you were kind of like you said, it's so important to highlight this. You had been building up, you had already seen some progress, you already feeling, and the biggest thing was, look, you were pretty chill about it. Your mindset was good. Even what you're talking about, you weren't in that state of fear and worry. You were thinking, I'm going to enjoy it. That's positive. I'm going to relax. That's positive. And you can see how your nervous system was fairly regulated when you did it because you didn't get any kickback on the back end.
Yeah, and it's important to mention as well at this point that between 2023 and 2025, where we are now, and when I was on the group sessions, I did do some flooding therapy, and there were times where I'd do it and I would have payback.
Yeah,
Um, but over time, as I kept doing it and I kept being brave and recognizing the symptoms as brain generated, the less payback I got over time. And I think that's really important to mention
ding
to
the
people.
bell, ding the bell, big time now. Let's pause there. Massively important, right? In the beginning, you did do some flooding therapy and you did get payback, kickback. But what did you do? Did you fold in and say, oh no, you didn't? And this is so massively important. You mentioned earlier the main emotion you came upon was fear and anxiety for you, right? We talk about fear avoidance. So that the fear goes up and wants us to stop, and you didn't stop, you didn't avoid. So essentially, you taught your brain that it was safe, right? And that's so massively important that you kept going. And I think that was a turning point for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's so natural to get scared after having a bad experience. You do a social occasion with someone or friends, or you go on a long walk, get really bad payback. Okay, I'm going to back off and I'm going to stop. This approach isn't working for me, that kind of thing. I can understand that because that would have been me had I not come across this work genuinely. But through doing the group calls with you and everyone else on the call is so supportive as well. It's a wonderful community because they're really great at actually picking you up as well when you might be having doubts or struggling a little bit. And I was like, do you know what? I've tried everything else, and I'm really starting to become convinced that the brain is fully implicated in this. So I'm going to keep up this flooding therapy. Yes, I was getting some really bad days with symptoms where it was really pretty bad.
How did you handle them, by the way? Because this is another really important piece for people. It's like exposure is one thing we can do, but I always tell people what's more important is how you handle the flare-ups because they could you could go either direction, right, with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I found the most helpful thing to do was actually because you've got a load of YouTube videos where you just sort of like talk through, the mind-body connection and you've got some somatic tracking tracks on there. And I just like listen to those on repeat. I might be, sitting at home or I certainly wouldn't lie in bed all day. I certainly wouldn't do nothing. I would be aware of the symptoms, but I wouldn't let the symptoms drive my behavior.
Yeah.
if you see what I mean. So if I had bad symptoms, okay, it's not great, but it's not going to stop me from going to the coffee shop down the road. It's not going to stop me from, doing this or playing PlayStation or something like that. Because at the end of the day, that means you're sort of giving in to those sort of fear patterns, as it
Yeah.
were, those self-protection patterns, which ironically aren't really self-protective at all. They kind of keep you cocooned in this
Yes.
in this big, small box.
That's right. So you were able to go through that and continue on, even with the sensations or symptoms. So important for people to understand. Keep a right mindset. Do some somatic tracking, and essentially all that time, everybody listening, what Adam was doing was basically teaching his brain that he was okay again, that it was safe to, and his brain was trying to protect him and say, "Oh, no, no, don't do that. Stay home. Go back to bed." And you're like, "No, no, it's no need for that." So your brain updates, right? Which your brain started to update
Yeah.
obviously, right? And then you have that big, massive, you call breakthrough with the walk.
Mhm.
And after that, what happened? That really is still the strong belief at that point.
That was absolutely the cast iron guarantee to me that all of my symptoms that I'd had before were brain generated. And I got to the point when I did the long hike with my friends, and we're already planning on doing more. They used to do them, and I didn't get involved because of my symptoms. But now, I got to the point where my symptoms were so minimal and fleeting that I felt confident enough to do the hike. I probably wouldn't recommend it for someone who's like got uh, 9 out of 10 chronic pain every day. I don't think I'd recommend that. I think the brain is far too activated at that
Yes.
level. But I got to the point where I genuinely felt like I was like 95% better at that point. And I think it's important for anyone watching this is that things can change relatively quickly if you're working with a long time span of symptoms. So, as I said, I started these symptoms 2009. From 2009 to like probably about 2018, there had been like not really any big, meaningful improvement. However, from then on, the improvement was really exponential once I'd found, the mind-body treatments and started learning about the brain and how it's implicated in physical somatic symptoms. Things can change actually quite quickly and quite profoundly. Like I'm
Yeah.
well now. I live a normal life. I work a full-time job. I got married, last year. I literally live the life of a normal person and more because now I exercise and, I socialize. Nothing stops me from socializing with my friends anymore. I literally live a normal life. Someone who is operating at like 15, 20% for 8, 9, 10 years.
10 years. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just everybody take this in. It doesn't matter how long you've had it, right? You get the right information and you start putting it into practice, and then your belief grows and you're working on the emotions and you did the graded exposure, getting back to life. You did all the right things. Boom. It started, I call this an upward spiral. You started spiraling up and then you had that big, jolt forward. And so, I mean, it's powerful, right? To see that, doesn't matter how long you've had your symptoms.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so important as well. It genuinely does not matter how long your symptoms have been there. They are correct. They are correctable. And I remember early in my journey reading stories like, if you've had it more than 5 years, you'll probably have a lot of symptoms the rest of your life. Nothing can be further from the truth. Nothing can be further. I've seen people with chronic pain and other somatic symptoms who've had it for 30, 40, 45 years and have made a full recovery. And
Yeah.
if they can do it, it's possible for anyone, no matter how long you've had it.
Yeah, totally. Because it's neuroplastic. It's from your brain, so it can change as your patterns change, right? And as you work with these things in a new way. So as you were kind of merging out of it, you think about how your brain was different or how you were different. Like what changed in you? Like what did you learn from all this? What did you gain from this?
I think that the most important thing is that obviously listening to your emotions is key in this process. If you're not willing to listen to your emotions and just feel them, it will be very tough, I think, to get sustainably, fully well. I think it's such an important key part of this whole process. Alongside that is actually owning the fear and not let it control your behavior because For me, I let fear control my behavior for far too long. And if I'd have learnt about this work, 10 years prior, I wouldn't have been ill for so long. It really is as simple as that. And the last thing is as well, do what you're passionate about, do what you enjoy, and make time for yourself. And the importance of honoring your needs and honoring healthy boundaries, I also found incredibly useful. And I know even now that I'm better, I do still get the odd fleeting symptom every now and then, but I do have the
Yeah.
tools to work with it. And usually those fleeting symptoms come up when I'm not honoring my needs, and I'm not being kind to myself, or I'm not doing something that I enjoy. Um,
Yeah.
and it
Very good
just,
point.
yeah, it really teaches you this set of symptoms. It really teaches you the importance of balance in life. Balance in life is so, so important.
Yeah. So when you're getting out of balance, right, or whether you're not paying attention to your emotions or you're not taking care of yourself, you're, like you said, putting other people first, right, or stressing yourself.
Yeah.
It could be any number of things, right? Your body can act up,
Yeah.
and then you're being able to recognize that now. And does it, when it does act up a little bit, just for people to understand this, does it come up in the similar way that it did before, like the similar neural pathways?
Yes, it does. It does, and it's kind of like those old symptoms come back.
Yep.
So I'll get a bit of peripheral neuropathy, for instance, or I'll get a day where I get pain again in my lower back, or just something like that. But then when that kind of thing comes up, I'm like, okay, well, what am I ignoring? What am I not listening to? What is my brain trying to tell me? Also, sometimes if it's a little bit resistant, I might do a parts exercise where you look at different parts of your psyche. Are you ignoring one part? And it's just about, just you don't have to honor what that part wants, but it's just about listening to that part. Maybe you've got, an anxious part or an angry part, and just being like, okay, I hear you and I understand that you're there and you're an important part of me. And then the symptoms just tend to go away. But if you're ignoring your needs, your brain will let you know. It will genuinely let you know, even if you're well, it will let you know.
Yeah, it's there. Like I tell people, your symptoms or sensations are there for a reason a lot of times, and they're giving you information. Sometimes it is over the top, right? Sometimes it's just anxiety flaring up and the person's so anxious. And so it's not really giving us a accurate reason, but many times it can be, like you said, ignoring your needs or you're not taking care of yourself, you're being hard on yourself, you're putting pressure on your, all the personality traits that could come into play, right? Or you're tending to everybody else, or you're not
Mm.
having fun, you're not spending time doing something enjoyable or passionate. It could be so many reasons, right? That it could, and it's important to also know, I think you just highlighted that, look, you had these neural pathways for a long time, since 2009. They can get activated again, and they do. But you're saying, neuropathy, that's not what it is, right? I want to be clear. We use these words because we describe physical symptoms with physical diagnoses, but it's not neuropathy. It's emotions, right? So that's the hardest thing for people to realize, right? That this is emotional stress coming out in this physical way. And so I think that's so important for people to understand because we say, yeah, I got the headache or it's okay to label it like that as long as you go deeper, right? You don't just get stuck there and go, oh, my back's killing me right now. And you just stay on that and you go, oh, I better put the hot pack on. And you
Mm.
totally don't recognize the emotions, right? So to make
Yeah,
that connection deeper is so important, helpful.
yeah. And also, I actually forgot to mention this, but it's really important actually. Early in the days of me discovering the mind-body connection and the mind-body work, I remember I actually tore a muscle in my. We were moving house, and I was trying to move a sofa, and I tore a glute muscle. And obviously, it's really painful. Did an MRI and that kind of thing. After 3 months maximum, that is recovered itself, and you should not be in pain at all. However, I was doing all of the hot compress and putting ice on it and all of this kind of stuff, and effectively, it went on for another 5 months because I refused to believe that the brain was actually causing the symptoms. And it wasn't just pain in my glute anymore. After 3 months, it was pain all over my low back. I'd get mid back pain. And I was like, how can this happen? Because I haven't damaged that part of my back. Or, this glute is recovered now. The MRI has shown it. And that's around the time that I was reading Alan Gordon's The Way Out book. And I started using the methodology literally within a month. Pain was gone. Haven't had it since.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And I think it's also, I mean, you're highlighting so many great points. I mean, I think also just to understand that your system, right? You've improved a lot with your emotional awareness and expression, and that's really helpful. But even with that, like we can still get these symptoms, like you said, and we just need to know our systems for us because our way we learn and our upbringing and for many, many years that we could end up getting physical symptoms that are just emotions or the brain's causing it. Like we can't ever forget that, right? Because like you said, you can get caught going down back to the physical again. And that's the problem, I think, is everybody thinks physical symptoms, physical problem. But if you know you're the personality type or you know you're the type who gets these things, we have to always be on the lookout. I mean, for me now, being a physiotherapist, I've gone from all physical to be like, oh, it's TMS.
Yeah.
It's my brain, unless I know for sure I hurt myself because I know myself, right? So maybe for you to speak to that, you can make these connections quicker now, right?
Absolutely. It's actually the first thing it used to be the last thing which would come
Yes.
in my mind, and now it's effectively the first thing to come into my mind. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, this is a classic example. I was at a gig with some friends, seeing a band that I absolutely love. And we were standing for like 4 or 5 hours. I'd had a very, very stressful week at work as well. Anyway, when I got home, I noticed I was getting really bad low back pain. And 5 years ago, if that would have happened to me, I'd be like, oh, well, I was standing up for quite a long time. And, maybe I pulled something or strained something, even though I had no evidence of that. The first thing that I jumped to was I was like, okay, what's been going on? What am I not feeling? What's going on for me right now? And I was like, I've just had a really stressful week at work. And there's a lot of stuff work-wise which I hadn't resolved internally that week. And I was like, okay, what we're going to do Monday morning, we're going to prioritize resolving all of that stuff, letting go of the stress from last week. We can't control that. I woke up the next morning, no back pain, gone. So there you go. There's the evidence.
There's the evidence. Yeah. I would say the proof is in the pudding. Like,
Yeah.
and again and again, I think when you know yourself, you just need to understand that that's the way your system works. And right, you have these neural pathways that were lighting up and firing off for so many years, over a decade, that's like I tell people your highway of stress. Like when you're stressed or like you said, you're not taking care of yourself, those pathways can light up again. And it just because you're getting the physical symptom, go to the emotion, go to the stress, see what's going on. And I think that's like a huge learning, right, that you get from doing this work. And amazing, amazing. So so amazing you're back to living your life, right? Do you feel like would you say you're fully there, fully recovered?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as healthy as the next person now. Yes, I occasionally get a symptom here or
Sure.
there, but we're part of the human race. Healthy people get the odd symptom every now and then. They're probably emotionally driven, most likely.
We still
Um,
have emotions to the day we die, right?
exactly, exactly. But now I know how to work with those sensations. Actually, we'll call them sensations. It's a better word.
Yeah.
It's a more appropriate word.
Yes.
Um, uh, I know how to work with those sensations and not panic and not fear when they come up because it's just effectively, a repressed emotion that's trying to express itself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. And when you see it like for yourself, like, and I see this every single day, and it's blown my mind the type of symptoms that I could see in people. Like you said, anything. But when you see the connection for yourself, right, it's powerful to see that, wow, yeah, these emotions do cause physical symptoms, but they're really just emotional sensations. That's the better word, like you said. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, fantastic. Any last words for people who are out there still working through it, struggling
But
through
I'd
this?
just love to say never, ever, ever give up. Never give up. If you haven't noticed any improvements within the first 3 months or 6 months, that's not a bad thing. It just shows that some of these emotions are, quite deep. Some of the neurology is quite resilient, but it does change. You just need to stick the course. Stick the course. I was one of those guys who it took a long time to actually, fully get better. And I'd probably say that from starting to get better to actually fully getting better, it took over 2 years
Yeah.
of actually slowly, incrementally getting better. So, if that gives, I'm really hopeful that gives people hope who have been on this journey for a long time, because it is possible.
Yeah. Great, great parting words. And again, the timeline, I tell people put the timeline out a year starting with. And that way it's not a timeline anymore. And then if you get there, put it out another year.
Yeah,
They don't think about it. You just do the
yeah,
work. Like you said, do the work. Thank you so
yeah.
much for coming on, Adam. Your story is amazing. It really shows that it doesn't matter how long you have these things, and you can change your brain and change your symptomology and get back to living your life. So so awesome. I'm so happy for you.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thanks so much. We'll see you later.
Take care.